Imagine being 20 years old and believing you are literally the son of God, not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech. You actually believe divine blood runs through your veins, that ordinary human rules do not apply to you, and that every person around you exists only to serve your destiny. This is not a movie plot. This was the real mind of Alexander the Great, the man who conquered most of the known world before he turned 30, and whose psychology holds a warning that still applies to leaders, bosses, and even ordinary people today. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly how absolute power can quietly rewire a human brain, and you might even recognize the same warning signs in someone you know right now, maybe even in yourself. Alexander was born in 356 BC in the kingdom of Macedon, the son of King Philip II and Queen Olympias. From childhood, he was told he was special. His mother, Olympias, filled his head with stories that his real father was not Philip at all, but Zeus, the king of the Greek gods. Most children hear bedtime stories about dragons and fairies. Alexander heard bedtime stories about his own divine origin. In modern psychology, we call this an inflated self-schema, a belief system planted so early in childhood that it becomes part of a person's core identity before they are even old enough to question it. Children who grow up hearing again and again that they are destined for greatness often internalize this idea so deeply that ordinary human limitations start to feel unnatural to them, almost like an insult to who they truly are. By the time Alexander was a teenager, he was already being tutored by Aristotle, one of the greatest minds in history, and he was already commanding respect that most adults never receive in their entire lives. Every advantage, every teacher, every ounce of admiration was slowly building the foundation of a mind that expected to be treated as extraordinary. When Philip was assassinated, Alexander became king at just 20 years old. Within a few short years, he crushed the Persian Empire, one of the largest and most powerful empires the world had ever seen. He defeated armies many times larger than his own. He marched through Egypt, through the Middle East, through Persia, and all the way to India. And this is where the story stops being a simple tale of military genius and starts becoming a case study in psychological transformation. In Egypt, Alexander visited the Oracle of Siwa, a sacred site deep in the desert. The priest there greeted him and, according to ancient historians, addressed him as the son of Ammon, an Egyptian god the Greeks associated with Zeus. Alexander never denied this. In fact, from that moment forward, he began to actively encourage the belief that he was divine. Think about what that does to a young man's brain. He is already the most powerful person he has ever met. He has already conquered nations that seemed unconquerable. And now, religious authorities, the very people meant to represent truth and morality, are telling him he is literally a god. This is what psychologists today call a feedback loop of grandiosity. Every victory confirmed his belief that he was chosen by destiny. Every person who bowed down to him removed one more piece of ordinary human reality from his mind. There was nobody left in his life brave enough to say, "Alexander, you are still just a man." This absence of honest feedback is one of the most dangerous psychological traps that power creates. Psychologists call it the power paradox. The more power a person gains, the fewer people are willing to disagree with them, and the fewer honest opinions they hear, the more disconnected from reality they become. Around this same period, Alexander began founding cities named after himself. More than a dozen of them scattered across 3 continents, each one called Alexandria, each one a permanent monument to his own name. He also had coins minted showing his own face wearing the horns of the god Ammon, a detail that ancient Macedonian kings had never dared to put on their currency. Think about what it means to see your own divine image on every coin that changes hands in your empire. Every merchant, every soldier, every child who touched that coin was reinforcing the same message back to him, that he was not just a king, but something closer to a living god walking among mortals. Alexander started demanding a Persian custom called proskynesis, which required people bow down and even kiss the ground in his presence, a ritual normally reserved only for gods. His own Greek and Macedonian soldiers, the men who had fought beside him for years, the men who saw him bleed and sweat just like them, were disturbed by this. Some historians say his closest friends began to whisper that their king was losing his mind. But here's the disturbing part. Alexander did not see himself as losing his mind. In his own mind, he was simply becoming what he was always meant to be. This is a classic symptom of what modern psychology calls narcissistic escalation, where a person's self-image grows so large that ordinary human boundaries, humility, and self-doubt completely disappear. One of the most tragic moments in Alexander's psychological unraveling happened at a drunken banquet. His close friend Clitus, a man who had literally saved Alexander's life in battle years earlier, criticized him for abandoning his Macedonian roots and acting like a Persian god-king instead of a Greek soldier's leader. In a fit of rage, fueled by wine and wounded pride, Alexander grabbed a spear and killed Clitus on the spot. Moments later, according to historical accounts, Alexander broke down in grief and guilt, nearly attempting to take his own life. This is a critical detail. A truly stable, healthy mind does not swing from murderous rage to devastating guilt within the same hour. This emotional instability reveals something psychologists today associate with narcissistic injury, where any criticism, even from a trusted friend, feels like a life-threatening attack on a fragile inner self. So the response is explosive and disproportionate. The public image was godlike confidence. The private reality was a mind under enormous, unbearable pressure. Not long after this, Alexander also began executing officers on mere suspicion of disloyalty, including men who had served his father for decades and had never given him any real reason to doubt them. A conspiracy theory would take root in his mind after a single rumor, and instead of investigating calmly, he would order swift and brutal punishment, often extending the punishment to the accused man's entire family. Psychologists today would recognize this pattern as a form of paranoid ideation, a state where a person's fear of losing control becomes so intense that they start seeing threats and betrayal even in the most loyal people around them. Later in his life, Alexander burned the magnificent Persian capital of Persepolis to the ground, an act some historians believe was impulsive, possibly fueled by alcohol and a desire for revenge, rather than any careful military strategy. A rational, calculated leader does not destroy one of the greatest cities in the world on a whim, but a man who believes he is above consequence, a man who believes history itself bends to his will, might not think twice before doing exactly that. As Alexander pushed deeper into India, his own army, men who had followed him loyally for years, finally refused to go any further. They were exhausted, homesick, and terrified of endless war. And Alexander's reaction reveals everything about his psychological state at that point. He did not negotiate. He did not show understanding. He sulked in his tent for days, like a child denied a toy, refusing to speak to anyone, until he was eventually forced to accept defeat and turn back. Think about that. A man who conquered empires could not tolerate the simple experience of being told no by his own men. This is a textbook example of what psychologists call intolerance of frustration, a trait commonly seen in individuals who have never in their life faced meaningful limits or consequences for their actions. Perhaps the clearest window into Alexander's fractured psychology came after the death of his closest companion, Hephaestion, who many historians believe was also his deepest love. Alexander's grief was described as extreme, even by ancient standards. He reportedly ordered the physician who treated Hephaestion to be executed. He cut his own hair in mourning, a Greek tradition usually reserved for the death of a parent. He banned music throughout the camp for an extended period. And in one of the most telling details of all, Alexander asked the oracle of Siwa whether Hephaestion should be worshipped as a god. This single request tells you everything about how deeply the idea of divinity had consumed his entire worldview, so much that even his grief could only be processed through the lens of gods and immortality, rather than ordinary human loss. Grief, love, and power had all become tangled together into one overwhelming psychological storm. Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BC, at only 32 years old, after a mysterious fever that some historians believe was worsened by years of heavy drinking and relentless physical exhaustion. On his deathbed, when his generals asked who should inherit his massive empire, Alexander reportedly said only one chilling word: to the strongest. He left no clear plan, no successor, and no stability, because in his mind, perhaps he never truly believed he would die at all. A man who believes he is a god does not plan for his own death, because gods are not supposed to die. Within just a few years after his death, his empire collapsed into years of brutal war between his own generals. The man who conquered the world could not even manage to protect what he built, because his mind, by the end, was consumed by godlike delusion rather than grounded, rational leadership. So what does modern psychology tell us about what really happened inside Alexander's mind? Researchers who study power and leadership describe a pattern called hubris syndrome, a form of acquired personality change that can develop in individuals who hold extreme power for extended periods of time. Symptoms include an exaggerated sense of self-confidence, a loss of contact with reality, impulsive and reckless decisions, a growing contempt for advice or criticism from others, and an inability to accept that they, too, are still bound by ordinary human limits. Sound familiar? This is not just an ancient history lesson. This same psychological pattern has been observed again and again in modern political leaders, corporate executives, and even celebrities who spend years surrounded only by assistants, employees, and fans who tell them exactly what they want to hear. Researchers studying modern leadership have noted that people in positions of extreme power often stop reading social cues correctly, start interrupting others more frequently, and begin to see themselves as the exception to rules that apply to everyone else. It is the exact same psychological blueprint that destroyed Alexander more than 2,000 years ago, just wearing modern clothing. The real danger of power is not that it corrupts people overnight. The real danger is that it slowly, quietly removes every honest voice from a person's life until nobody is left to tell them the truth. And once that happens, a person can start making devastating decisions while feeling completely confident that they are right, simply because nobody around them has the courage or the position to say otherwise. Alexander the Great was not simply a brilliant military genius who happened to go mad. He was a case study in what happens to the human brain when unlimited power meets zero accountability. And that is a warning worth remembering, whether you're running an empire, running a company, running a household, or simply running your own life. The next time you find yourself surrounded by people who agree with everything you say, that might not be a sign that you are always right. It might be a sign that you have quietly lost the one thing every powerful person eventually loses without noticing: someone brave enough to tell you the truth. If this video opened your eyes to the hidden psychology behind history, make sure you subscribe to the channel.